Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boomerang. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. I'd like to remind the gallery that Council's meeting law requires that members of the gallery must not interject or take part in councillor debate. Any person who is called to order may be requested to leave the chamber. Notwithstanding this, the Mayor may invite members of the gallery to speak for up to 3 minutes on a report listed in the agenda. There is also time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. If you have registered to speak online, you must let a staff member know that you've arrived. I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that all council meetings are live streamed to allow the community to watch and to listen in real time. In accordance with council's local law, this meeting cannot be separately filmed or audio taped unless permissions granted by the Mayor. And in the unlikely event that there is an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. Okay, councillors, we'll go to the agenda now, and first up is item 1, apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies? Councillor Gross? Councillor Simic? Thank you. Councillor Baxter, you'd like to second that? Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meetings. Councillor.
Can I request a small amendment to one of the notes in the minutes from the December the 4th meeting in the public submissions on the petition that was presented that night? It notes that this is about Rhonda Small's submission. It says Ms. Small spoke in support of the petition and focused on the definition of what a safe street means to the community. She spoke against the petition. So could we strike out in support of and just put against in, and the rest of it is actually accurate about what she said, but she was speaking specifically against the...
Councillor Brand, I remember that, and we'll accept that amendment to the minutes of the 4th of December 2019. We also have the special meeting held on the 11th of December and a special meeting for the 29th of January 2020. So with that changes, councillors, do we have a motion to confirm these minutes? Councillor Pearl to move, Councillor Bond to second. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 3 is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict in any matter being discussed tonight? I note there are none. 4, petitions and joint letters, and we have no petition or joint letters on the agenda tonight. 5, sealing schedule. Councillors, we don't have any documents requiring sealing. So we'll move on to the next item, and prior to public question time and pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, a condolence motion has been added to tonight's agenda in recognition of the passing of Bob Semple. Councillors, with that condolence motion, do I have someone to move this? Councillor Pearl? Councillor Pearl, would you like to read the motion?
Certainly. The Council expressed its deep regrets on the passing of Robert Bob Semple, OAM BEM, offers sincere condolences to his family and the Rats of Tobruk Association, and places on the record its appreciation for his distinguished service to our country and our community.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl?
Absolutely. Bob Semple, OAM BEM, was president of the Rats and Tobruk Association based in Albert Park, and he passed away on the 16th of January 2020 at 99 years young, 3 months short of his 100th birthday. Bob was one of the last surviving Rats of Tobruk, a brave group of soldiers who held the Libyan port for 8 months, the longest in 1941, the longest held siege in the history of modern warfare. And they held it against a very famous general called General Rommel, who led the African troops at the time in Germany and then was dispatched to Europe, one of Germany's finest field commanders in terms of his military and tactical attributes. The Desert Fox, exactly. And this is a huge triumph and defining moment in the Australian and New Zealand military history, in that this was the first time in World War II that the Germans had actually been pushed back and, in some cases, defeated. After Tobruk, the Rats of Tobruk didn't have much time to bask in their enjoyment in terms of their holiday in Egypt. They were then sent to El Alamein, which was a ferocious and pivotal battle of World War II. Then they were sent to New Guinea, and also after that they were sent to Borneo. He was discharged in late 1945. 75 years ago, the branch of the Rats of Tobruk, the Victorian branch rather of the Rats of Tobruk Association, was established right here in Port Melbourne, and the branch in Albert Park is the last remaining association across any Australian state and territory other than its home base at Puckapunyal. Bob's dedicated service to support the association and to keep the memory of the siege of Tobruk alive for future generations is one of his key things he'll be remembered for. In 1983, Bob was awarded the British Empire Medal. In 2016, he was awarded the Order of Australia Medal. In October 2018, a postage stamp was issued with Bob's picture on it from the Australian War Memorial. I, as a number of other councillors, had the great privilege and honour to get to know Bob, and he lives an interesting life in terms of he is a war hero in some respects, but it's remarkable for a man to get 600 to 800 people to his funeral when he has no children. He had no direct children, he has no direct descendants per se. Yet here is a man that probably is better defined in the last 40 years of his life than the first 50 years. He never forgot to thank people. He was a man of uttermost decency and respect. He had respect for his God, he had respect for his country, he had respect for his fellow mate, and he had respect for every individual regardless of what their background were. And he ultimately taught me that people respect service of something much greater than themselves than they'll ever respect a person as an individual self. When I asked him last year what were the values he lived his life by, he told me 4 things. And these are 4 important things that defined his life. They were the value of mateship, the value of loyalty, the value of integrity, and most importantly, the value of respect. Rest in peace, Bob Semple.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to add to the condolence motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Such a beautiful photo. Item 6, which is a public question time. Councillors, we have one person that's requested to speak. I'd like to ask Mr. Edward Hagg, please, to come forward. Welcome, Mr. Hagg. You could possibly sit at the end of the table and over there and turn your microphone on.
Yeah, what I'd like to ask the council is, I live on the boulevard in Port Melbourne. We have a massive issue regarding caravans, mobile homes staying in our residential street up to sometimes 7 days. I'm wondering if you can give me an answer regarding 2020, December, the TT line is doubling in size of their boats. I'm just wondering if you can tell me, has the council put any strategy into place to deal with this massive extra flow of large caravans, mobile homes, travelling through our area and camping and things? You know, we get a lot of problems with the campers dropping wastewater in our streets. We're getting problems with the campers parking outside the residential homes. I ring the council, I speak to local laws, Russell Brown, when he was a coordinator there. He tells me sometimes it takes up to 4 days to get a local laws officer to come out and address this situation. I mentioned to Russell Brown, and I've spoke to the EPA about the wastewater. These vehicles are deliberately taking their wastewater caps off their vans, mobile homes, whatever. And Russell Brown is aware they're dropping wastewater into our residential streets 50 metres from our beachfront. He says, what can I do about it? I'm asking the council to police it. Our quality of living in the boulevard, since the council made a decision on this letter in 2014, has deteriorated. They say in this letter here that they've done a deal with the TT line to allow these larger vehicles, which are illegally parked, unrestricted or not, they exceed 7.5 metres in length. Local Law Act 709 states they're not allowed to be in a residential area more than 1 hour. These vehicles sometimes stay 3 days. When you shut the toilet area down there, the vehicles that haven't got toilets use our bushes. You see them walking out of the bushes with toilet paper in their hands. We're supposed to be in the city of Port Phillip, Port Melbourne, a premier area of Melbourne, 3 kilometres from the CBD, and we're getting behaviour like this. I've reported it hundreds of times to the council. Nothing has ever changed. I'm asking the council tonight for a change. I've presented a letter in writing, signed by Terry Wright, stating the council allow this.
Okay.
That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr Hagg. Ms Rosick, are you able to perhaps address that and let Mr Hagg know what the next steps are going to be in relation to following up his issues?
Through you, Ms Mayor, I'll address what's part of the questions that have been asked by Mr Hagg in relation to what's happening in that precinct, and Mr Johnson will respond in regards to council local laws. So we're aware that there is increased visitation to Station Pier, and the council has implemented a new queuing lane to help with the transport, movement of transport into that area during cruise season. As well as that, council's recently been notified that we have received some funding for the streamlining for growth through the Victorian Planning Association to help us undertake precinct planning for the waterfront precinct, which will be undertaken in the coming months, and we'll be working with key stakeholders in the community to progress that. In regards to enforcement of behaviours and amenity impacts, I'll invite Mr Johnson to respond to that.
Ms Rosick, just before you do, the precinct of the boulevard is not in the Station Pier area. It's further on down. So just to take that in.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will have to take a lot of Mr Hagg's questions on notice, but just in general, council, so that particular road doesn't have parking restrictions on it. Anecdotally, a lot of the vehicles that are parked along there are from interstate, where road rules do differ. Council takes, given that situation, council does take an educative approach. So we like to try and get people to not park there in the first place. I will take the rest of Mr Hagg's specific questions about that area on notice. I would say that during the summer period, though, we do have local laws patrols that actually try and target campers actually along the entire length of the foreshore in the city of Port Phillip. This is an issue elsewhere as well, and they are often quite successful at encouraging people to leave the area. So.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I'm just wondering if you could have a chat to Mr Haig and tell him how you would communicate back to him, given I'm not sure he's on email or things like that. So,
through you, Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to.
Councillor Crawford, you had a question?
I'm not as familiar with that end of town, but is restricting the length of time people can stay there a starting point? Or is that going to have unintended consequences?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the project that Ms Rosnick referred to, which is a joint project with the state government, TT Lines and Vic Ports for the cruise ship industries, is looking at shared traffic management studies. That project will work over the next 6 months to share information, intelligence, and work in a coordinated way, not just on Waterfront Place, but traffic more broadly along the waterfront. So that project is a new project, recognising there are many stakeholders, and that has already agreed to share traffic management studies and come up with trialling some different solutions, as well as looking at some more permanent solutions. So we'll communicate that to the community as we go, and there will be a community reference group as part of that. So anything that group comes up with, we'll engage with the local community to share some of the things we're thinking of doing.
Thank you. Now we've had another speaker request. Mr Michael Sabata, please.
Thank you, Councillors and Mayor. I've got a number of questions.
Mrs Sabata, if you would state your name and so
Sorry,
please.
Michael Sabata, resident of South Melbourne.
We know who you are, but people online may not.
Okay. Is it the case that the council has insurance payment due to it or owing to it for the water damage that has occurred to the South Melbourne Town Hall? If that's the case, what is the sum due from the insurer? My third question is, why has the water damage portion of the Town Hall not been repaired on the ground floor? That's used to be referred to as the theaterette post the previous renovations. And when will the water damage portions of the Town Hall be repaired? And so those are the questions regarding the condition of the Town Hall. And my other question is regarding the replacement of the access ramp on the eastern side, the Annam entrance to the Town Hall. Council might not be aware, councils might not be aware that the few different people are claiming credit for the funding of that, and I'd like to know or have it clarified, is it the City of Port Phillip paying for that work? And if it is, at what cost to the council? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Sabata. Mr Carroll, are you able to address those questions, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so I can get the specifics right, I'll take most of those on notice, but in general terms, yes, there is an insurance component that council is due. I'm not quite sure what the amount is, but the amount for the overall rectification works will be significantly greater than the insurance sum. In terms of the ramp, the council is funding that works and leading it. And in terms of the broader pace of works here, we're doing at the South Melbourne Town Hall, we're doing detailed investigation and planning at the moment, and looking to do that work collectively. We also need to consider a proposal that Annam has put to council regarding the future use and investment in that site as well, so that we're aligned in whatever we do in the future.
Mr Carroll, do we have a timeline for when the access ramp will be completed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I did have a discussion on this in the past week or so. It is this financial year. I can't remember the date, but I'll report back. I think it could be around March or April.
Thank you. The other questions, Mrs. Sabata, will be taken on notice. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to item 7 on the agenda, which is councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers that you wanted to raise? Okay, there are none, so we'll move to presentation of reports. And I just might do them in the order that they're on the agenda, actually. So we'll go first to item 9.1, which is the Multicultural Advisory Committee Terms of Reference, and we don't have anyone that's requested to speak to this. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Gross. Sorry. To move, Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, look, I think this is a very straightforward motion. They're sensible proposals in the terms of reference. That's all I need to say.
Councillor Baxter?
I won't say a whole lot except that Councillor Simic isn't here, so if he was, I'm sure he'd say that this group does a lot of really good work with our council, and that very pleased to get these terms of reference adopted.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move to item 9.2, which is the Friends of Suai Covalima Chairperson and terms of reference. Now we do have one person that's requested to speak, Meg Olsen. Would you like to come forward? Thank you. Welcome. Could state your name and suburb, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Megs Alston. And really was just to thank the... I mean, if this is endorsed, to thank the Council for the endorsement of my re-election as the chair, appointment as the chairperson, and just to explain the terms of reference have been updated to reflect a streamlining, I suppose, of the committee, and to just make it more efficient and have less smaller groups meeting and overlapping with each other. So there's nothing really other than that I was going to say.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers or even Ms Alston herself? No? Then we have an officer's recommendation, which is to endorse the nomination of Ms Alston as chairperson. Do I have a mover? Councillor Baxter to move and Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
I will briefly. Look, it's a great group, and Megs has been an awesome chair, and so I think it's a great vote of confidence by the council, assuming this passes, in Megs's running of that group. That we've most of us have been down to their annual trivia night, fundraiser trivia night, and I hope to see as many of you there this year as possible. Good on you.
He's a very funny man.
Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I just want to say, if in fact we do endorse you, we want to thank you for putting your hand up again. Chair of the Friends of Suai committee is it is actually a really important job, and I think each person has done it with an incredible depth of knowledge and incredible competence and energy, and it's been one of the reasons, I think, why the Friends of Suai has been so successful as a group for so long, partly held together by good chairs, and you've been one of them, so thank you very, very much.
Would anyone else like to speak? I'd just like to say brief few words, and it seems like we're going to endorse this recommendation tonight. So I'll presume that that's what we're going to do. You do never know. But I also want to say that late last year, the Friends of Suai annual report came to council, and it's always such an incredible experience reading through that report and seeing all the different projects and all the things that have done for that community by our community here, and that's under your leadership. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, and I fully also endorse that your re-election, if you like, to the chair position and also the change in the terms of reference. So, Councillor Baxter, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Well done. Now we'll move to item 11, which is 11.1, which is a collaborative procurement for sorting of curbside recyclable material and advanced waste processing. And again, we have no speakers. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Gross, I believed you had one.
Yes, look, I've got an amendment to the officer's recommendation. I'm happy to take your advice on when you want me to raise this. We have got a role to play in the southeast.
Yeah, so maybe you could ask a question around that, which might sort of tie in why you're making a possible amendment. So why?
Yes, could I just ask the CEO, what role do we have in the current southeast process?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the City of Port Phillip has observer status in the collaborative procurement for advanced waste processing in the southeast. It's a southeast conglomeration of councils. So we're not a formal partner, but the other councils have allowed us to have a seat at the table to observe what's going on in that process and to take some of those learnings for the eventual Northwest collaborative procurement process.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Mr Johnson, can you just confirm that by being observer it also allows us to opt into that process at a future stage in the process? Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that is correct.
I'd like to ask a question as well, Mr. Johnson. Just trying to formulate it, but this is a really fast-moving space, even though it feels like we're going at snail's pace. But things are changing rapidly, and just wondering, is it better to be an early adopter or to wait until there's perhaps new technology in it? Just wondering what the council, the officers think about that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, this is a fast-evolving space. We are fortunate in that the City of Port Phillip is in the Northwest group of councils. That Northwest collaborative procurement has always been staged to come after the Southeast. So we have the fortune of being able to learn from some of the processes that the Southeast councils will go through. I'd also mention that the approach that is being proposed for advanced waste processing is to be technology agnostic, so to effectively go out with a performance specification of what council or what the councils would like to achieve and allow the market to come back with solutions to achieve that outcome. So that does allow for innovation in a sector which is fast evolving.
And Mr. Johnson, how did the principles be developed? Like, what was the process around that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the principles are aligned with Council's Don't Waste It strategy. The principles that are outlined in the strategy are the principles that are used or proposed to be used for the advanced waste processing collaborative procurement approach.
And one further question from me about the cost of this MOU. Is there any financial tie to signing this MOU, or both these MOUs?
Through Madam Mayor, I might defer to Mr Dunstan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, not at the present minute, no. This is more of a commitment to start a business case in the case of AWP and to start investigations for procurement in regard to recycling.
Thank you, Mr Dunstan. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Gross? Amendment?
A motion which is the officer's recommendation.
Are you able to read out what that amendment is?
Yeah, so it's 3.1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 as recommended by the officers, with 3.6 that Council notes that Port Phillip has observer status with the South East Advanced Waste Processing Procurement Process.
Might want to put status in there too after observer, Beck. How's that looking, Councillor Gross?
Looks wonderful.
Okay, so Councillor Gross has moved the officer's recommendation plus an addition of 3.4 there. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to your motion?
Look, just briefly, I'm ridiculously optimistic about this process, given that this is an area that there's been disappointment time and time again over a long journey. And I'm optimistic because A, there's going to be economies of scale. If you look at the map on page 71 of the minutes of the agenda, you can see that Melbourne is divided into two, the northwest and the southeast, and we are right on the border. And Bayside is in the southeast, but logistically, it might be simpler for us to go with the solutions that are being pioneered by or talked about by the southeast, or it might be better for us to go in the northwest. Historically, we've been part of the northwest region. We were part of the pre-amalgamation Western Region Waste Management Group, which went from Port Phillip all the way out to Brimbank and Hume. So we are logistically in the middle, and most of the costs that council will endure are logistical type costs, because waste is a lot about trucking material hither and yon, and in the future it's not about moving it but processing it. Now, why am I optimistic? It is because I sense there's a sea change in a number of attitudes about waste, and an impatience that Victoria has not done well on waste. So I sense that, and I know there's been some great appointments to the Metro Waste Group, which gives me cause for optimism. I wanted to put in 3.6 just because it is a statement of the truth. We are officially part of the Northwest process, but we have been accorded observer status with the Southeast process. So I think it's important to say something about that, because that would be a full and frank statement of the truth. Secondly, that gives us flexibility, or we can choose. Thirdly, the Southeast process as an observer, it's sort of, new territory for us, this whole process will be. But what it says is that we could be a fully fledged member, or we could just use the South East and contract with them. So in one sense, we'd have more flexibility with the South East process, and we can make a decision, do we want to wait for the South East process to come and go so we can learn from it, or do we want to be an early adapter? When I say early adapter, a lot of these technologies are decades old in other countries, but they aren't so much in Victoria, and that's because there's been a bipartisan reluctance to embrace innovation in Victoria, and that has led to certain appalling outcomes and a very uncompetitive and narrow market for processing of waste. So I urge everyone to adopt this and to just note that 3.6 binds us to nothing. It just is a statement of the truth.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. As I was a seconder, I'll also just quickly speak to it. I do agree that 3.6 of Councillor Gross's addition is quite benign. It talks about it in the body of the document. It just wasn't in the resolution, so I don't think there's any alarm there. But I am quite excited that we've got to this stage with telling the community about what we've been doing, because there's been so much work that's been done, I mean, from briefings from our perspective, but the officers of our organisation have been working so hard. And, just this little bit, gives you a bit of an inkling of what's been going on. This MOU will potentially address two major opportunities in terms of our council targets, and so that part of it I'm very excited about. And I'm really keen to get moving on this business case, so that's why tonight I'm going to be endorsing what the officer's recommendation is, because we really need to deliver on our community's expectations, and at the moment we're not quite there, and I think getting this out publicly about what we're doing is one more step further on down the path, so I fully support the motion. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? The amendment or the amendment here, the motion that's up here at the moment, that is the full one. Would any... If not, Councillor Gross, also Councillor Copsey.
To clarify process, once we vote on this, and if it's adopted, we won't be voting separately on a substantive motion. This is the substantive motion.
That's correct. This is the motion.
So I will speak. I am going to be voting against this motion this evening. I agree that we do need to be moving quickly to get better at avoiding waste in the first place and moving towards a circular economy. What I'm uncomfortable about and have remained uncomfortable about throughout this whole process is the elephant in the room that's sort of not mentioned in the MOU, incineration and pyrolyzation technologies, which are being lumped in under the advanced waste treatment term and carry significant risks and can have perverse outcomes in terms of including creation of a need for a waste stream in order to feed a particular piece of large, expensive infrastructure. I would like more comfort from the MOU that the costs of that sort of technology are going to be clearly communicated and talked about with the community. I find that every time we come to the discussion around advanced waste processing, this is sort of skated around. There are some really great advanced waste processing technologies that can help reduce emissions and also remove elements of the waste stream that can be treated rather than going to landfill, but there are also some that carry significant risks. Incineration does produce emissions, and that can depend on how much of the waste stream is removed. Should any plastics or recoverable material end up in that waste stream, then we could have emissions coming through that would not really being avoided. And that can be very different depending on the different incineration technologies that are considered, but I don't feel that the MOU is giving protection around that at the moment. I'm worried about long-term contracts being pushed in. As people have noted this evening, it's a fast-moving space. I am hopeful that we'll see some further announcements around this, looking at what has been, unfortunately, in the last year, a statewide crisis that's affected a number of municipalities. And I'm hoping that that will actually remove a large number of food and organic waste, particularly, that could mean that we're not seeing as much emissions-heavy material going to landfill. So I hope that this will line up, but I think locking in contracts before we understand what is happening in terms of recycling removal and food and organics can be difficult. In turn, the model of incineration actually talks about advanced waste treatment and how it's going to complement the circular economy, but if you're talking about burning rubbish at the end of the day, then you have not actually achieved a circular economy. Incineration is just disposal, and it continues that underlying problem that I think that we are trying to change here in Port Phillip, and is a really central part of our adopted strategies in Don't Waste It, which is actually wanting to reduce that out of sight, out of mind problem that we have with waste in our society at the moment. So that's a big one as well, and we should be exploring all options before we should be thoroughly exploring all options to make sure that we've actually implemented a circular economy, and then I worry that those technologies just won't stack up and so effectively would require subsidisation in order to stay alive, or locked in long-term streams which could generate a perverse incentive to produce waste. Finally, despite some of this tech being around for many years, as Councillor Gross has noted, there are actually still outstanding problems with operation of some of these plants, and it only you're only as good as your environmental protections in that regard. And I understand that with some of these plants, there's chemicals and fly ash produced by incineration that we don't currently have testing enabled for in Australia, and we wouldn't know where hazardous material that was being created by plant of that type would be stored and what community would be subject to that. So that's a brief summary of some of the concerns that I have around incineration. I am worried because the MOU does not rule out this technology, and in fact I note that the MOU contains a point that says some form of energy recovery will be required to achieve the business case objectives. That may be innocent, and that may be capture of gas from a digester or similar to that. The problem that I have with the MOU is the vagueness of the language, and it leaves the door open to this technology, which I don't think is A, the answer to our waste crisis, or B, an appropriate solution. I just want to say that I do support overall the group procurement model. I think it's fantastic. I really hope, and I can see that officers are putting into Port Phillip's agreement to proceed with this. A lot of what we're attempting to do is protect the strategy, the objectives that we've set out, which is avoiding having any recoverable waste go into that stream. What I'm concerned about is that the terms of the MOU are not tight enough to provide certainty that that outcome will be achieved. So for that reason, I won't be supporting it tonight, although I imagine that it will probably pass, and I do wish the officers all the best in negotiating that, and I hope we see good outcomes that avoid some of the dangers that I've just outlined.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I also will be opposing this motion. I do think that there is so much in our strategies and the way that we've come at this MOU process that is really good, and I really want to just make sure that the officers are aware of that. I think that 99% of what we're trying to do here is good, but there is an issue here where you can't really have something that says it's technology agnostic, and also that it's not going to incentivise volume of waste, because the direction that we're going into, which is that we want something that's market-driven, we want something that is technology agnostic, means that there's a large chance that we're going to have a market-driven incinerator solution, and for that to be economically viable, they either need, as Councillor Copsey said, huge public subsidies, which won't be forthcoming, or a contracted volume requirement. So that's what it's like all over the world. That's how all of these incinerators work. And in fact, in some cities in the US, city governments have been sued by incinerators for not being able to supply enough trash, which gives rise to a liability issue, given that we want to actually minimise the creation of rubbish. So the main concern here is that we could end up with going down this path where we have to send our rubbish to go and be incinerated, and then at some point, when we're looking at all of our different principles and all of the things that cannot actually be reconciled, that bit about not incentivising volume of waste has to be abandoned in favour of meeting all these other requirements, in that it be cheap and market-driven and technology agnostic. So that's the big worry here. What that could lead to is that either we're forced into that arrangement, or if we aren't, and the incinerator is operating without any requirement for a certain volume of rubbish, we could be setting ourselves up by putting all of our eggs in one basket with another recycling crisis like we did when SKM went bust. If the incinerator goes bust and they're not actually able to operate anymore because they don't have a guaranteed waste stream and they're not making enough money, then we could be exactly where we were before, where we all don't have anywhere to put our rubbish. And so that seems to me that a big risk. And instead, what I would prefer to see is large investment on a statewide level from the state and from councils into an actual circular economy that reduces as much waste as possible, rather than simply finding a place for it to go.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Bond.
After listening to those past two speakers, one can't help but be reminded about that time back in 2009 when the Greens voted against the emissions trading scheme because it wasn't perfect. And I think that's what we've got on our hands here today. We've got a very good scheme that solves, or proposal that solves many of our current waste issues, but it isn't perfect. And I don't think that's a good enough reason not to support it. Councillor Copsey and Councillor Baxter is right. There are lots of advancements out there in waste treatment on the way. And this, I don't see anything in this agreement that precludes us from taking advantage of them and implementing many elements of a circular economy, which also includes recycling the calorific value of many of the products that we currently have on our hands. There are many zero emissions incinerators out there that issue no carbon greenhouse gases that would probably be of concern with the traditional incinerator that we all are probably used to putting up with. So I will be supporting this. I'm sure there are many advances in technology out there, and I'm not going to sit here and let someone's vision or idea of what they think is perfect get in the way of what is very good. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Pearl.
Very happy to support this as well, and I'd encourage all my fellow councillors to do so. If you don't support this motion effectively, and you don't support waste-to-energy initiatives in the future as they start to improve effectively, you're ignoring the evidence around what happens when waste goes to landfill, including leaching of toxic chemicals in the groundwater, poor use of space, particularly over future years, and the release of methane, which is a particularly potent and nasty greenhouse gas. All the evidence dictates that it's much more environmentally friendly in the current economic environment and the current technology environment to burn things than to throw it into landfill. It's it's a no-brainer. If you don't face up to the evidence, it's a sad but unavoidable fact for some. But happy to support this motion and looking forward to seeing what we get back from it.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Crawford.
Look, it's an MOU looking for the best possible outcome in regards to our waste. And there is never going to be... I went to see a special... the previous chief scientist speak to this waste review that the state government has been doing. And as he said, there is lots of different methods and technologies. None of them are perfect. And he said that, and he said none of them are perfect. But we have to do something with our waste, and we're at a point in time where business as usual is no longer working. They are not building any more landfill. There will be a reduction in what we can send to landfill. So we have to look at other options. And yes, of course, we want to get to circular economy. The reality of doing that in a short time frame is naive. I think it's something to aim for as part of this whole process, looking to do something with the remaining. There will be remaining, and it will be a time till behaviour change, and humans are not perfect, till we get to that stage where we are better at recycling everything and we are reducing it. It's going to take businesses years to reduce their packaging and supermarkets to get on board. There's a whole lot of things that have to happen. So to cut it off at the knees of the next step, looking at what is possible, I'm really disappointed, actually, so I will be supporting this motion.
Councillor Brand.
Yes, look, I'm interested. I'm listening to Councillor Copsey and Councillor Baxter, whose opinions and, well, expertise and knowledge and concerns I respect on this a lot. And, you know, I'm hearing them and I can see their points, but I really would have preferred to have an amended version sort of put up, which would be an alternative that would achieve that, because now I feel like being left in a situation where I've got to vote against the whole thing because of those particular concerns, and it's not, I think, the way that we can go about it, so I'll be supporting it.
Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
I do want to close. There is no way we can deal with this issue without scale economies. We have to have scale economies. When you look at the Gillard price for carbon, 2/3 were landfills to 3/4. Most of the taxpayers of the Gillard carbon price were either local governments or places that local governments send their waste to. We have to do something about it. It is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas. Methane, you know. Secondly, when you look at the sorts of results that local government is going to try to do, we will be able to merge with, I hope, those agricultural businesses that are seeking to recarbonise Australia's fairly poor soil. So since colonisation, 40% of the carbon has been lost to Australian soils. There's a huge advantage to try and recarbonise our agricultural soils and get rid of our waste. And indeed, the executive officer of the Mallee region said he looks at his dryland farmers as a tip that will take our processed waste from the city. On the question of incineration, the paper doesn't talk really about that. All it talks about is saving, as Councillor Bond said, it's about saving the calorific value. Now, if we go to Yarra Water has a facility which takes sewage, 33,000 tonnes of food waste, and uses methanogens and other processes to save calorific value and create gas that can be used as a fuel, and there is no fire there. So Councillor Copsey did concede that not all processes have to be incineration. And look, I just go back to my original point. We have to work in tandem with other councils. It is possible, and our officers have made it clear that we won't have to be forced into encouraging waste so that we can fulfil contracts. The contracts can be written, if you've got enough councils, it's viable with about 50% or less of the waste that 20 councils will generate. So I think that's an illusory fear, and the officers have addressed it directly in the paper. I think that we can never be the people who anoint technologies. We have to be agnostic on it, and we have to be careful about the opposite of anointing, prohibiting technologies, because we just don't know. We're not expert, and it's very early on, and I think that we have to be part of this procurement process which looks at the best possible technologies in concert with the rest of the sector, and that's the only way we're going to deal with these almost intractable problems.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Then I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Councillor Bond has requested a division, so I'll ask you to vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross and Councillor Crawford. All those against? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Baxter. That motion's carried. So we'll move on now to the draft live music plan, 13.1. We have no questions from the public. Councillors, do you have any questions? I have one to start with. Hello. Ms Hyde. First question is, we've got the St Kilda Festival coming up on the weekend. Will we be canvassing the community there about their views on the draft action live music plan? Ms Dennison?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we will have market researchers out in the field asking people if they'd be interested in participating in the consultation, taking their details if so, and we'll also have promotions at all our assist and information booths letting people know that the consultation is open or going well and that we'd like to hear from them.
I might just suggest that the people there are, perhaps a little biased potentially towards, loving live music. Is there some way that we identify them as being, really pro rather than just an average person in the community, so that we make sure that we get a good, proper cross-section of the community?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's a number of questions in the market research that would go to that, such as how frequently you attend live music, whether you actually live in the municipality, and whether you attend sort of festivals and events in public spaces. But I might add that we will also, through various council departments that deal with members of the community that are perhaps not feeling so positive about live music, we will be using our databases to contact them and let them know now's the time to talk to us as well.
Okay, and one last question from me is on the officer's recommendation. Just want some clarity around the last point that talks about the that the consultation will be presented to council at the same time as the live music action plan is consulted. That's a little bit different to our normal practice. We normally have the opportunity for the submissions to be heard, and then perhaps some room or some time to make some changes to the plan. Just wondering, is there a reason for this to be held together?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no significant reason. I think it was timing based at a very early stage of planning this process. that has been delayed. So we have flexibility on that, and we can certainly split that process up.
Okay, so we might need to amend the motion on that, so I might need some help, please. Councillor Copsey, you wanted to speak.
Sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. I was wondering if you have the dates that the community consultation will be running until. I had a question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, assuming it's authorised for consultation tonight, then it will be running through until the 22nd of March. So it's about a 6-week process.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Bond?
One of the most important roles for council with regards to live music in the city of Port Phillip is to manage the conflict between venues and generally surrounding residents with regards to noise and disturbance that the residents would feel. As part of this action plan, do we do much to address or to position council's role as the body to manage those conflicts, and how we can work with live music venues to ensure that they're compliant with regulations, noise regulations, EPA regulations that often disturb local residents? Is that something we cover in here?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, it is in a number of different actions, I guess with a real focus on where there's operators wanting to set up new live music venues, and we've got that chance, work with them from the start and do no surprises. We're also one of the councils working closely with the EPA, who are about to release a whole new set of regulations which possibly will make things harder again, and so we're in constant communication with them, advocating and representing both our residential community and our business and venue community as well.
And have we got in there a process that will allow music venues to achieve an effective outcome prior to council having to use the blunt tool of local laws enforcement to achieve that outcome? I just sort of feeling it'd be better for all round if we were able to work with them, and rather than sending our local laws guys to just start issuing fines and warnings. Is that a process that's included in this strategy?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to clarify the consultation issue, the intention is, if Council approves the draft plan tonight, that consultation will close on the 22nd of March, so there's plenty of time to bring back to Council feedback from the consultation and still meet the May 2020 deadline.
Terrific. Thank you. Councillor Brand?
Yes, I wonder if officers could just comment on, during the preparation of this report, there seems to have been a change in emphasis, that we started off with quite a strong core emphasis on live music venues and rock and roll sort of stuff, and there was that sort of, then it got broadened out. I just would like to hear about the relationship between those two dimensions in this report and this proposed policy.
Yes, so we had a consultant who, I guess their background and expertise was in live music, and particularly, I guess, for want of abbreviation, pub rock. And through consultation, particularly with the CEO, we felt that a live music action plan for the city had to be much broader than that. It had to, A, be across the whole city, and B, be all forms of music, not just pub rock. But, we've got a lot of other really important cultural and music organisations and venues in the city, and we felt that this music action plan needed to reflect that, and also the opportunities for emerging communities, some really exciting potential in Fisherman's Bend. I think the narrative in the city, because of events like the St Kilda Festival, is that it's all about pub rock in St Kilda. That's a very important part of the city and the heritage, but it's really about a much broader view of live music.
A short time ago we introduced parking permits for musicians. Just wondering if you could let us know what the uptake of that permit has been. Have any of our music venues taken us up on our offer to issue loading and unloading permits for musicians' private vehicles?
Ms Rosick?
Through you, Ms Mayor, approximately 4. So we haven't had a huge uptake, but 4 have.
It's more than none. That's good, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, so what we have here is an amended officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to it?
I'll just reserve.
Councillor Brand.
Okay, this is a really important policy for the City of Port Phillip. It's our reputation. A large part of our reputation rests on it. How we deal with live music, our reputation as a cultural city, and I'm confident that this is going to do a really good job of that, of building and preserving and furthering that reputation. I'm a little bit concerned about the. I guess my sort of mind starts off with pub rock too. Not that I actually go to many pubs nor listen to rock and roll very much live, but when I do, it's exhilarating and it's fantastic. And it is sort of in a way a core of the reputation that St Kilda has, and I'm pretty confident that initial work has been preserved and forms the core of this policy. I'm also really happy that there's a view that live music is much wider than that. And in fact goes to sort of all sort of corners of the cultural spectrum, and I think we have to absolutely pursue our policies right across into those corners, and I think that is a model for the way that we should be doing all of our cultural policies. Is to see certain central parts as core and iconic and fantastic, and then also see that culture goes far and wide beyond the standard classic forms of it into all sorts of other parts, and the whole cultural ecology is made up of all of this huge range of different forms of cultural life that we have. And I think that this proposed draft really follows that pattern and exemplifies what we should be doing. So, good. Thank you to everybody that's worked on it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? I'll briefly just say a few words. I'm very happy to support this resolution. I know there's been a lot of work put into this draft live music action plan. Actually, can't believe that this city has never had one. It's really quite remarkable that this is the first time that we're actually putting something together, given that it's such an integral part of the DNA of the city of Port Phillip as a whole. In reading through the document, the plan, the draft plan, I couldn't help but be totally taken aback at the locations in the city where there is no live music at all, and one of those places is Port Melbourne, a place where we are tonight, and there's actually no live music venues at all. So, but the other key point that I really liked within this live music plan is one of the best thing that the City of Port Phillip or Council can do is actually get out of the way and let it happen. And I think that is really a crucial key thing, because it's always happened. It just hasn't needed our help, but we can facilitate. And I think having a plan will actually allow that flow to happen a lot easier. So very supportive, and good luck with the consultation, and I can't wait to hear what the community has to say. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
Just also really excited that this is getting out there. It's I know that there's already been quite a significant amount of work and consultation gone into the formulation of this draft. So thank you so much to the officers and all of the people in our music community who have contributed to where we're at so far. And I'm really, really excited to have this plan go out, and I hope that we get lots and lots of good, honest feedback on it so that we can make sure that this is something that works. Music is such an important part of our existing life in Port Phillip, and I really want to see that grow. I think it's, odd that we haven't had a focused policy on encouraging that before, but I think it's very timely and good that as we head into, the 40th St Kilda Festival, which is a very big idea for a city council to undertake, and I think a real example of what we can achieve in this space when we put our mind and some support and resources into it, we've got a lot of existing talent in this city, and I want to make sure that we're helping it flourish. So please read the plan, tell us what you think, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of the public feedback.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Well done. Thank you. Okay, 14.1, the status of council decisions and questions taken on notice, recorded by council from the 1st of October to the 31st of December, 3 months of 2019. We have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Pearl.
Questions in relation to the decision made on the 19th of the 6th relating to 129A Beaconsfield Parade with the former Noshery Cafe. It says here that we've gone out to tender twice and haven't received any submissions, or it says haven't received any submissions to the second tender. It doesn't say it for the first, which closed on the 24th of December. It says here that officers are in detailed negotiations to finalise a lease, and the end date for this action is the 28th of the 2nd. Can we get an update on that lease and whether it will be completed by the 28th of February?
Mr Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll take that on notice and bring it back, but I know we are in negotiations. I've got an update on this recently, and it's progressing well.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Pearl to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? No. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to? Yes, yes.
I will just say I want to thank the officers for the work that goes into preparing this report. I know that it was something that we asked for as a council in order to report back to us and to the community on things being implemented, but I can see how much work goes into it, and thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to speak? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Now, 14.2, which is the proposed tenancy agreement with the Sandbar, which is 175B Beaconsfield Parade, Albert Park, which is the completion of the statutory procedures. And again, we don't have anyone that's requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl?
What's the $450,000 going to be used for? I should say, is there a substantial community benefit to the $450,000?
Through you, Mayor. That's a different question. It's to be used for operational matters within the cafe, which is the flooring and the walls, and the cool room, which they currently have some issues with.
And is there any way we can improve the toilet facility, external toilet facilities in that building? I think there's in... And when will that be completed?
Through you, Mayor, Council is currently undertaking a refurbishment of the toilets themselves for the public toilets.
Thank you, Ms Murdoch. Any further questions? Councillor Bond?
Occasionally I get feedback from a resident across the road who has concerns about some of the noise emanating from this particular cafe. Is there any proposal to double glaze the front windows in order to, or soundproof the roof in order to reduce the amount of noise that can be heard from across the road?
I note the tenant did speak to this at the last meeting. Miss Murdoch.
Through you, Mayor. There's no proposal for that, but it can certainly be considered. It is operating as a restaurant, and those EPA rules do apply to this restaurant.
In relation to an earlier question of two... Oh, yes.
Sorry, Ms Murdoch, 2.5 in the report says the tenant is going to install noise-absorbing ceiling panels. Is that correct? Have I looked at the wrong report?
That's correct, but it's not about the double... Sorry, through you, Mayor.
It was the ceiling or the windows. So they're going to do some noise absorption in the ceiling by the sound of it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct.
That's... But understand that's more for acoustics inside because it's quite loud.
It's part of Councillor Bond's question there, sorry.
Okay. Any further questions? We have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Pearl would like to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to it? Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Pearl.
I've already spoken about this, and the applicant isn't here this evening but was here previously, albeit it would have been nice for them to turn up tonight. I think this is a reasonable deal for council at the moment. It may not be 10 years from now, but it injects close to $1.5 million plus the additional capital into our building over the 10-year period, and I think that represents reasonable value in an area where we want a little bit of activity. Obviously, it needs to be managed in terms of community concerns, but it's a good business that employs lots of local people and is a good haunt for our local community, and I think this represents good value for ratepayers, and I'm happy to support it, and I urge my fellow councillors to do so also.
I'll put that motion, councillors. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, that was the last item on the agenda. So, item 15, which is notices of motion, and we have no notices of motion tonight. Reports by councillor delegates being 16. Do we have any reports, councillors? There are none. 17 is urgent business. Do we have any items of urgent business? There are none. Then we'll move to item 18, which is confidential matters. And councillors, tonight we have one confidential item, being 18.1, Metro Tunnel Project, which is a compensation for loss of revenue for on-street parking. I'll now call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public. Councillor Crawford to move, Councillor Gross to second. So I'm closing the meeting in accordance with Section 89(2)D of the Local Government Act 1989 as items relate to a contractual matter. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously.